Minnesota this year was a great defensive team. Top of the league, great defensive team. And in the first two games in Denver, Nuggets, lethargic, were not ready for the physicality and the intensity and the relentlessness of the T-Wolves. The underdogs came in, threw a big punch, and knocked Denver down. But then they got 3 days off, full days, and they heard for 3 days from guys like us, people like us, how bad they are. They're cooked. They're terrible. And that stuff you always find out later. Coaches, they edit up clips and they show the team in a reel over and over and over. Denver rebooted. They're the more talented offensive team, much more offensive skill. Between Joker and Gordon and Porter and Murray, all those guys could drop 30 on any night. They rebooted and they turned a defensive series into a who's more skilled series, dusted themselves off, went to the corner, got a little advice, and the series now looks like a mismatch. It went from defensive intensity in the first two games to offensive skill. And outside of Ant, Minnesota really can't match up. They were not a great offensive team this year. Ant has become a great offensive player. Karl Anthony Towns, terrible yesterday, has been hit and miss in his career, though he's very gifted. But there was nothing inherently wrong with Denver when they were down 0-2. It just looked like they weren't ready to play and couldn't match up physically. The length of the T-Wolves, the aggressiveness, but they had the same coach. It's not an old roster falling apart. They didn't have any key injuries. They just weren't quite ready for the series. And again, it shows how valuable coaching is. You go back to that Warriors-Celtics final. After 3 games, the Warriors look cooked. Okay, Steve Kerr, heart of a champion, fly cross country, a lot of time together, make some tweaks, and from that point forward, Warriors go into Boston, win the game, win the series. It totally flipped the series. So Denver this year, 0-10 when they score under 100 points. So they just had to figure out, they may not be as good defensively as Minnesota. They had to get the offense right. They needed several days off, practice, film work. They're 0-10 when they score under 100. So they had to get the offense cooking, and that's most notably the Joker, who has been in the last 2 games unbelievable. Gordon goes 10 for his first 10 yesterday. So we knew Minnesota was the better team in this series defensively. But we also knew offensively, Denver's got 4 offensive players, all capable, all in their prime. It just didn't look like they were ready for the wrestling match in the first 2 games in Denver. So they got up from the mat, really good coaching. We saw it with Steve Kerr and the Warriors. The defensive team won the wrestling match for the first 2. The last 2 games in Minnesota did not even look like the first 2 games in the series. The T-Wolves, by the way, equally well coached. So what does it flip back to now that they moved to Mile High? I don't know. My guess is, though, throughout the history of the league, defensive-led teams can win a lot of games, but it's an offensive skill league, and Denver now looks like they're in control. So the Knicks got pasted. First of all, I mean, they're missing all sorts of players. But there is something to be said that hustle's important, toughness, intensity, they really, really matter. And the Knicks have a lot of that. But those minutes add up, and we kept saying, when's the dam going to break? Like, how long can you be led by a dominant, ball-dominant point guard who's playing virtually all the minutes? How long can Josh Hart play with this much heart and produce double his career averages? Like, at some point, when does it end? That was yesterday. That game was never competitive. So, listen, I don't even think Knicks fans think they're a great team. They're a great story, and they have a lot of heart. But again, you need talent and skill. The Eastern Conference is bad. This is about as bad as it's ever been. And then you add on the fact that players like Dame and Giannis were hurt, and they scraped and clawed their way to a couple of wins. But again, when your scoring comes, almost all of the key points come from a ball-dominant point guard. I've seen it with Dame in Portland. I've seen it with Westbrook teams. I've seen it with Harden teams. The Warriors were different with Steph. It wasn't about Steph being ball dominant. That was never the issue. It was about ball movement, off-ball movement. That's where Steph's a legend along with his shooting. And so The Warriors never got into that ball dominant stuff. It was always about moving the pieces. Draymond Green could have the ball. He could be the catalyst. So it didn't wear down Steph Curry. There were other scorers. There was Klay Thompson. At one point there was Kevin Durant. It wasn't all. By the way, in the last year or two, it's become too much about Steph, and the Warriors don't do anything. So Brunson was averaging 35 a game in the playoffs, number one usage rate. You just kept asking, how long? It's not being a hater to say, yeah, this thing doesn't feel like it's sustainable. That's being realistic. Now, the good news for the Knicks, the really good news, because this wasn't the case for the last 2 decades, they look really well run. They actually have a culture, like a Miami Heat culture. They have a Villanova culture. They play hard. They've got to be very careful when they go to get the next star that they don't give up too many pieces. Can you keep OG? You'll keep Brunson, but could you keep Josh Hart? You're going to have to give something up to get another high-end player. They'll move off Randall, maybe Mitchell Robinson. Maybe they'll get different size. But in the end, they look well run. They've got a culture, and maybe they beat Indianapolis. Maybe they beat the Pacers. But working really hard matters a lot. You can work as a comedian all day writing jokes. At some point, you have to get on the stage and be funny. You can work really, really hard as a basketball team. At some point, skill and talent takes over. And the Knicks don't have a ton of it. But they're well run. They've got a culture. They fight like hell. They're fun to watch. They're easy to root for. And maybe they win the series. But they're 6-0 when they win the rebounding battle. And they're 0-4 when they don't. So that's a pretty good indication. Resilience, toughness, working hard is sort of their thing.
Hi, everybody. It's me, Uncle Colin. Subscribe here to get the latest from the herd, including exclusive behind-the-scenes videos and more, wherever you may be, however you may be watching. Thanks again for making us part of your day.